This is the operator side guide rail. This is the OT guide rail. This is the sled. These are the top bearings. These are the side bearings. The top bearings, here and here, do not require adjustment. The side bearings do require adjustment, and we'll go through the procedures. Setting up a Pro Cut is basically two stages. One, the sled, and two, the square. And we'll go through both one at a time. The first thing we want to do when you first want to check your Pro Cut is the adjustment of the sled. The first thing we're going to do is set the operator side guide rail. Very simple. You get a measuring tape, or in our case we have a caliper, and you measure here 5/8 of an inch. You go to the other side, you measure 5/8 of an inch. So as long as you have 5/8 and 5/8 on both sides, then what you do is you get your wrenches, 9/16, you lock the rail down. Once you lock the rail down on both sides, recheck and make sure you're 5/8 of an inch. As long as it's 5/8 and exactly the same on both sides, that's fine. You can be a little bit over, a little bit under, doesn't matter. Most important thing is to have this guide rail even here and here. This now becomes the reference to set up the entire sled, this operator side guide rail. Included with your machine were two 1/2-inch spacers. Two 1/2-inch spacers, one goes here and one goes here. So with one spacer here and one spacer here, 1/2-inch, what we've actually done is we've set the operator side guide rail exactly 1/2 inch to the sled with these little spacers. You never adjust the top rollers, these are preset, but you do adjust the side rollers. With your guides in place, your spacers in place, all you do is you're going to push this snugly into the rail and lock it. Push this snugly into the rail and lock it. Now we have the two side rollers with the spacers in place snugly against the operator side guide rail. Another way to do it, once you have these in place, you push the sled into the guide rail very gently and you lock it. And then you can snug these into the guide rail, whichever way works best for you. Ultimately, we want the sled exactly parallel to the operator side guide rail. And that's the responsibility of these rollers. When you pull these guides out, they should be snug, but you should be able to pull them out. Okay? If they're way too snug, then basically loosen the rollers off and do it again. Now that we have these side rollers set up to the operator side guide rail, now we're going to adjust this. Now, every adjustment you make on the sled, we see that there are two inside bearings on either side. And when you see inside, I can push those freely with the rollers adjusted on both the top and the bottom. That's very important to make sure that these are called floating guide blocks. And these floating guide blocks are actually designed to roll back and forth. I'll explain the purpose of these a little later, but they do work in conjunction with all of the rollers. Once you adjust this side, really important to roll the sled back and forth to make sure it's running smoothly. Don't be concerned with side-to-side play at this point because we'll be adjusting this. Also, don't be concerned with squaring the machine. The sled has nothing to do with squaring. We're simply making sure they're rolled back and forth smoothly without any play. Okay, now we're ready to adjust the other side, the non-operator side. These two side bearings are the exact same as the side bearings on the operator side. However, these bearings will take the play out of the sled. Play meaning side to side or wiggle out of the sled. And the tighter you make these, the tighter the tolerance. You can adjust this machine up to 1/1000th of an inch if you wish. Just keep in mind, the tighter you make the tolerance, the tighter is going to be the sled moving back and forth. But to do this, you can either use a shim. So this is a 1/1000th or a 5,000 inch shim. So this is a 1/5000th shim, and we're going to place this shim between the side roller bearing and the guide. And once that shim's in place, you get your wrenches ready. Put a wrench inside and one outside. With your shim in place, gently snug the bearing up to the rail and tighten. Now if you don't have a shim, what you can use is sheets of paper. One sheet of 20-pound bond paper compressed is roughly 1/1000th of an inch. You can use 3, 4, or 5 sheets of paper kind of bundled up like I have here and use it as a shim if you don't have actual shims. Same idea, you place it between the bearing and the guide, and you put your wrenches, one in, one on top, and then tighten the roller up to the guide. Now once you perform that on this roller, you want to move the sled and make sure it's not restricted. You also want to make sure that you take the inner white bearing, and you should be able to push that back and forth easily with your finger. If this bearing ends up too tight, then it's going to force the side against the bearing block internally, and it's going to act like a brake. So you might have to play with this a little bit, but you have to make sure that it rolls back and forth smoothly. With that one adjusted, we do the exact same thing to the other bearing on the other side of the sled. We put our 5/10 shim between the roller and the guide rail and snug this up to the rail, the shim, and then tighten the 2 bolts. And to tighten the bolts, 2 9/16 inch wrenches, put one on the bottom, one on the top, place your shim, snug it in, and then tighten it up. Or you can use your paper shims as we discussed earlier. Okay, so now a quick review of what we've just done. The first thing, we adjusted the operator side guide rail, 5/8 of an inch here, 5/8 of an inch here, and we tightened the nuts and bolts on either end of the guide rail. This is the reference guide rail. Then we adjusted the 2 side rollers here using our 1/2 inch shims placed here and here, and we just snug the rollers up. After every adjustment, we make sure the sled moves freely. The next adjustment, we adjust these 2 inside bearings here on the non-operator side guide rail, and we use a 4,000 to 5,000 shim. The tighter you make the tolerance, the tighter the sled is to move back and forth. We find that 4 to 5 thou is a perfect adjustment for the machine. Now, what you want to do after you get all your adjustments done is move the sled and see if there's any side-to-side movement. As we can see on here, there's very little play, and yet the sled slides extremely freely. So right now we're adjusted at about 2 to 3 thou. Remember that if you have this at about 4 thou here on the rollers, on the actual blade, it's close to 1 thou. So there's very little play. Never trying to see if there's play by rocking the arm back and forth. With all this leverage here, you can actually flex the guide rails. So now that that's done, the sled's moving freely. Now what we want to do is square the sled to the side fence. We're now going to put the saw in the machine. And we'll tighten it up. The ProCut 50, it basically has two segments to the side fence to allow it to move in and out when you're transporting it or just plain for storage or to get them out of the way. So to align it, it's important that we make sure we're aligning the entire side fence. To do that, we want to take a long straight edge. 4-foot level works perfect for this. And we're going to place the clamp. We're going to clamp that side fence wing and that side fence wing. There are two side wing locks here, and two bolts that bolt the entire side fence assembly. Everything on this adjustable side fence has slots, so you can move the side fence obviously back and forth. So to do the setup, I'm just putting a long ruler here to hold my T-square, and I'm going to use a long T-square and place it in here. Set the depth all the way down on the saw. To do this adjustment, you have to have the blade out of the way. I just use an elastic and do that. Now, with the side fence and your straight edge clamped to your side fence, put your T-square up and run the saw back and forth. You want to hear a slight scraping sound as it moves back and forth. You may find it easier to do this adjustment if you take the push rail out. So all I want to do at this point, because all these bolts are loose, this bolt's loose, this one's loose, the two side wings and the side fence. What I want to do is just get it close to square, the whole assembly close to square. And that's fairly close to square. So now we can see that our side fence wing locks are free and they can just ride back and forth in the slot. We have it close to square. So now what we want to do is, when it's close to square, which it is now, we're going to bring this lock up and we're going to put it tight against here. And we're going to lock the bolt. And you want to lock it good and tight. And you want to lock the side fence wing. Because now what we're going to do, on this bolt, the whole side fence will pivot so we can get the side fence square. So, again, you're going to take your T-square and you're going to run it back and forth. Now, you can hear a slight shaking sound the entire length. So the entire flat of the blade is riding against the T-square, and the T-square is tight to the side fence. Now that we can hear that, we're going to tighten this, and we're going to tighten the one on the other side. Now with that tight, we're going to bring this guide up to here, and we're going to tighten up this one. And really tight. Lock this back in place. That one's now squared. Now you can see we're perfectly square.